Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting conversation with Jamie Thorpe. And Jamie, you're the Chief Experience Officer at Ipsos in the UK, and I'll let you explain a little bit more about that. But what I love about the conversation that we're having today is that your title might be Chief Experience Officer, but the way that you think about experience is more than just the customer experience. You think about the entire ecosystem, like internal employees, channel partners, the whole ecosystem of how we bring together ultimately the value and the loyalty that we create and the trust that we create inside of our clientele, right? So we're going to have a really good conversation about that and just think about the evolution of where CX is going and how we should be thinking about it. You've been doing this for a while, like me. You've got a little bit of gray in your beard, right? So you've seen the evolution. But beyond the kind of the breadth of how that you look at this, your interest, you draw a lot of parallels between experiences in your personal life. As a father, or a 14-year-old son, you have interest in snowboarding or football. How we experience the world and how we experience things in our business world, there's a lot of overlap. And I would love to just have you, if you don't mind, before we get started here, explain a little bit more about your background and kind of how you see the world of CX.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. So how do I see the world and my background? If I do those if I invert the order there. So my background is that I've been in this space for genuinely 30 years this year. But what's really interesting is that the CX industry as it is today, or the experience industry as it is today, is not the same as where I started. Where I started 30 years ago was, very basic or early stage customer satisfaction type work. Everything was very siloed in terms of how organizations looked at things. There wasn't the acceptance or the recognition of the power of experience as it is today. What's been really interesting for me over that time is how I've grown personally and professionally along with the profession, and to see customer experience and experience holistically be what it is today has been really, really fascinating for me. I was there when NPS, the world went NPS mad. I remember that. It was Facebook surveys, the world went NPS nuts. And then, we're into much more advanced tech and much more mature approaches and models and frameworks for how experience interacts within organizations. So my growth and journey through to experience today helps sort of shape my views. And I think, as you've mentioned, being a certain age and having come through that, I have, as you mentioned, a 14-year-old son. So the world has changed a lot in terms of what they see and experience. And when I look through the lens of my personal life, everything is experiential now. And all the research that we do, people want experiences now. Whereas you go back, I'm 48, right? Let's get out the way now. I'm 48 years old. I remember when I was sort of early 20s, the drive was very much keep up with the Joneses. It was all materialistic. People was get the house, get the car, get this, get that there. Then the new generation, however you define new generation, are looking for experiences in everything. And the way in which that industry has changed, the way the industry has wrapped around that, and the way people have changed over that time, means that we have to look at things differently now, and we have to think very holistically when we think about experience. And you make a reference to that about how I see experience. And I talk about customer experience because that was where I grew through, and that's the industry I've been involved in. But my responsibility in Ipsos now, for example, here in the UK, is also for the employee part of our business, the channel experience part of our business. I lead an experience growth group that also includes user. And these specialisms would have been so siloed before that organizations, work with clients that people representing these departments, if you like, wouldn't have said hello to each other in the corridor, let alone actually work together. And now this experience ecosystem is much more advanced. So the evolution of it has been really interesting to see.
Well, I'd love to give out a stat here from I think it was a 2023 McKinsey study, just to kind of lay the foundation for, we all know how important CX is, but it becomes sometimes one of those things that we hear so often, like the word value, that it just kind of fades into, I know we got it. I know it's important, right? McKinsey did a study in 2023. They looked at over 400 highly profitable companies, B2B and B2C. And the number one differentiator in the market that they determined was CX. That's how important this conversation here is, right? And a lot of companies in the B2B world, they don't have somebody that has your title, right? They don't have a chief experience officer. They get CMOs and CROs and CSOs and but not no chief customer, no chief experience officers. So the focus that Ipsos has put onto this in the spotlight that the organization has is unique, right? And so I would love to just hear, like, if we could start out maybe just why relationship driven growth is so important to every organization and tying it back to CX.
And it's a really good point because we see so many different, we're a massive global business, right? So we work with so many different organizations. And when you think about the level of maturity across those organizations, we see the full spectrum from people that totally get it. Like be one of those organizations that the McKinsey study, we've got studies on it. Forrester have got studies on it. CX leaders outperform the market. I mean, it is fact. Yet we still see some organizations that don't have experience that have a seat at the top table. But the most advanced, most mature organizations see the power, see the value, and importantly, see the return, because that's what we are. That's what everyone's in business for, right? And we used various different models. We've got a model we call OXY, which is return on CX investment, which links the financial performance of an organization to its experience performance. And there are many organizations that get it, still some that don't. And I've got a fantastic quote from a gambling company we worked with, and this was the CEO of a gambling company who once said that when the odds are even, experience is my differentiator. And that's exactly it. You know, when you look at some organizations that say, we've got the same products or similar services, experience is what makes a difference. And to your question, how have long-term relationships shaped that? Experience is underwritten by relationships. And I know that we've got technology now that we could have only dreamt about however many years ago, and clearly there's AI, et cetera, but the human connection, the relationship that features in an experience exchange of whatever it might be is still the key driver of difference. And it's those people that are able to augment technology, but still keep their human side, to have an authenticity, a credibility, a trust with their customers. It's those people who are winning. It's those people who will continue to win. It's those people or those brands that get forgiven by clients or customers when things go wrong because of their approach. And those are, you know, those subtleties, if you like, have become really, really big drivers in terms of how people create sustainable success in their organization, because relationships and sustainability go together. So when I mean sustainability, I mean from sustainable growth strategies. So trust through authenticity, being reliable, being credible, taking the time to understand the customer, make the effort to understand them deeply. Think about how you feed back to customers, but at the same time, don't fear innovation, you know, so be bold enough to be able to make a difference, but staying true to what happens in your organization that works for you and your customers.
So I want to make sure that I'm taking something away correctly here, because, you know, CX can be such a broad area. It's like almost like, where do I start, right? You know, what doesn't impact experience? But what you just said there is something that really focused it for me in terms of, if we can think about it in terms of way of building trust, right? Then all of a sudden, in marketing or in sales or customer success or finance, I understand, oh, my job is to help build trust, right? And I know how to do that. So it gave me a way to think tactically day to day, what is my role in creating an experience that's delivered from the entire company? But my department, me is alone. Is that like a good takeaway on that, or?
Great takeaway. And I think I use this, and I have used it in various presentations before. I've seen some stats where people try to pin whose responsibility is experience. And there's a funny slide that I use that has a bar graph where people talk about the departments, if you like, within an organization, but it is genuinely everybody's responsibility. And I think what is interesting, you mentioned marketing, for example. Marketing's a great example. If I go back to when I first started, the marketing professionals and the people delivering the experience, they weren't connected. People would make these massive outlandish statements about what a brand is or what it stands for or what it can do. And then the experience people had to deliver that. And at the time, people got away with that, right? Because they could say we are the best or the biggest or the best and we do this. And experience was never, if it didn't match it, people got away with it. The way we are from a social media point of view, the way we are now from a customers being more fickle, customers being more vocal, you cannot get away with that. So there has to be a genuine connection, and there has to be authenticity and trust that if a brand makes a promise, it has to be delivered. If it doesn't, in this modern world, that brand knows about it now, whereas previously they used to get away with it. And now you see when poor experiences or brand promises are delivered, it wipes value off of share prices. It wipes value off of organization in a way that it's just never done before. So every part of a journey that touches or engages with a customer needs to be on the same page, even though their role might be slightly different. They are playing a role in the holistic experience delivery to a customer. And that's why when we talk about employee or we talk about user or we talk about channel, because as you go through a journey, you're touching so many different parts of the organization. They have to be more aligned than ever before.
So let me ask you this question, another kind of like centering question here in terms of we can say we know exactly what we do and how we help our customers. So we're going to build trust in exactly how we know they need our help versus taking a step back and saying, hey, let's just look at the voice of the customer first. Let's just look, what are their needs first? Like, what do they want from us first? And build ourselves around that, build trust into their ecosystem of how what their risks are, what challenges they face. There's a study that came out, and I'd love to have, if there's links that Ipsos has on this, I'd love to put it at the bottom of this podcast. They did a customer obsession study in 2024, and they found out that only 3% of B2B companies are customer obsessed. So even though all of us say, I mean, there's not going to be one of us that doesn't say we're not customer obsessed. No, we're not customer first, right? We all are, right? But what you're talking about is actually walking the walk, right? Not just talking about it, but doing it. How do we, like, if there were some practical, from your point of view, working with so many different companies and inside of Ipsos, practical things that we should be thinking about and doing as executives, because the audience here is B2B executives that are listening to this, to make sure that we're delivering on a true customer experience strategy that's best fit to our customers. What are some of the things we don't do right that we should be doing?
Yeah. And I think when you look at organizations, and everyone will say they are customer obsessed. If I had I've had $1 for every time someone told me that they put the customer at the heart, then they do, honestly, from everything from awards to annual reports to presentations from C-suite. But that customer obsession stat that you've got, we have similar, it is true. They aren't living and breathing it. They are selling a story that they hope is what people will gravitate to. The other thing, just to pick out what you said at the start of the statement there is, or question there, is around giving customers what they want. That's dangerous because customers don't always know what they want. The voice of the customer feedback might give you one thing. And again, I come back to this word holistic. We look now at voice of the customer. We look at transactional data. We look at footprint across websites. You have to take a holistic view as to what the customer is actually doing. Because a customer uses a brand, they give you a great example. I'm sat in London today. I use the trains coming into London with great regularity. If you look purely at that on my transaction, you'd think I'm an advocate. I can tell you now I'm not. It's not a choice, it's a lack of. So when you look a single dimension of a customer interaction, you can take a read from it that isn't accurate. I think when I work with the organizations who are leading in this space, there are a number of different things that they do. I was speaking at an event last week with a client, and I had the pleasure of meeting their global CEO a couple of years ago. And normally when I meet these guys or these girls, you see them walking down the corridor, coming into the room, and someone's briefing them just as they come into the room. This is Jamie, he's from Ipsos, this is what we do with them, et cetera, et cetera. This guy came into the room for a 30-minute meeting. He's the global CEO of a massive healthcare organization. An hour and a half later, we were still talking, and this guy knew the ins and outs of this program. He knew the ins and outs of what he wanted from the customer, because that organization, he is the person that is leading it, and they are taking their lead from him. So senior sponsorship is so important. This is not, CX is not a project, it's an evolution. It's not a single department, it's everybody. And for that to be lived within an organization, people need to know that they have the remit and the support of senior people to make a difference. The second thing is thinking about, what is the plan? What is your plan? What is your roadmap? Okay, what can you actually achieve? And I see numerous organizations on with great regularity saying, we want to do this. If you are never going to be able to do that, don't put it up as an ambition. A great example is financial services in this country. So we've got some financial service institutions that have been around for a very long time. To change the underlying technology that sits in there, or to change something, is a massive, massive undertaking. So people will often, well, what can I control within that space to make a difference, rather than making sweeping outlandish statements? And having a roadmap has to be linked to the why. Why am I doing this? What is the end result? And CX professionals need to be able to verbalize and articulate the value of the activity that they're doing. And that comes back to ROI that I mentioned earlier on. So I know if I drive this program, that's the outcome. And that's what we can mobilize behind. And having a plan, you need to think about what we do within the organization, and also what that means to our customers. What does it mean for customers to have a strong relationship for us? And that's multifaceted, and we've got various models that we use for that as well. So senior sponsorship, know why, have a plan, and make it achievable in driving action.
So I don't want this to be a curveball I'm throwing in here, but so one of the number one challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth inside of a B2B organization, and because I asked that question, I asked that question of you. I don't know if you remember in our prep call. I started asking it about 100 interviews ago. So I've got just over 100 C-suite executives that have answered the question, what do you consider the greatest challenge for creating long-term sustainable growth? The number one challenge was internal alignment. And everybody, when I say that, everybody nods their head. We all get it. We've lived in it, right? So we understand. But if that's the case, now all of a sudden, there's already so much to align on, right? Just our departmental objectives that are separate, right? What our definition of our ideal customer profile is, let alone having a plan for an CX, an internal experience. Like, how does this not just add to the confusion? How does this not add to the misalignment and, lack of understanding between companies? How does it bring them together? How does CX help change management, alignment internally inside of an organization?
I mean, even think about it in the question there, just to turn it around. The way in which you sort of describe it there is, we've got all this alignment. How do we then layer CX on top of that? But it is, and we see that, and the answer is within that statement there. It's not something that goes on top of it. It goes all the way through the middle of it. And that's the thing that we need to, that sometimes people don't realize, that we see silos within organizations, exactly to the point that you're making there, because they don't see how experience has to feature in everything that they do. Everything that they do. It needs to be there. It needs to be present. It needs to be considered as something that has to be as part of every process design, every journey, every touch point. Not, we will design this, then let's think about the experience on top. And that's where a lot of organizations go wrong. And silos do exist, and they still exist, but the most successful brands are, to remove the silos, you have to typically go up the chain. To go up the chain, you're coming down from somebody senior to say, make these barriers go away. You are, there are different either P&Ls or responsibilities within the business, but the common thread here is we're all working towards the same target for the customer to drive sustainable growth. And so you have to understand where the journeys are within an organization, and you have to take the barriers out, but you have to be bold and brave enough to do that. Otherwise, you will just continually be butting up against internal silos.
It seems like within all of that, that like a constant drumbeat of internal communication, because even if we communicate things one, I mean, like I learned that I started in media many decades ago and, it was like reach and frequency. There had to be like a 3+ a frequency just to get a message and have it sink in and internalize. There had to be frequency behind it. And so this is complex. This is not a simple task. How important is like there's a human element to this, right? The human element internally, the human element of our relationship and communicating between humans. I don't know what my question is in there, but how important is it? How do we indoctrinate it? And how do we get humans to internalize it and share it?
Yeah, it comes down to culture and a genuinely customer centric organization, despite everybody saying they're customer centric, we know they're not. Genuine customer centric organization will understand that the customer view has to be considered and adopted throughout everything, like I said, everything that they're doing. And there are different ways that people do this. I used to work with a retailer that in every meeting room, they had a special chair, which was actually nominally the customer chair. So even though customer there, I think it was the retail director at the time said, we want a chair in every room. And every time they'd be in a meeting, they would refer almost to the customer being in the room. And that, whilst it sounds massively gimmicky, it sort of worked for them, that for them, because it prompted them to question it, to challenge it, and to bring the customer view in. What we see now is that more CXOs or chief customer officers, CCOs, have a seat at the top table, and so they're able to influence it in a different way. But it is interesting, as you mentioned earlier, when you look at some organizations that don't even have those roles yet, or they squeeze it under another role within the C-suite, say, well, that person's responsible for that. It's just ticking a box, and there's a difference between ticking a box and doing something in a genuinely customer-centric fashion.
The empty chair concept. Amazon, depending on what circles you're in, sometimes gets lauded for one of the most customer obsessed companies in the world, right? They have an empty chair concept. And it's been about a year now, but I interviewed a chief customer officer of theirs. And the empty chair concept, well, it's a virtual chair a lot of the times now, is very much alive. And it grounds you. It's like they're thinking is if the customer were here, influencing the decisions we're making in this meeting, whether this meeting is a finance meeting, a sales meeting, a marketing meeting, a production meeting, their influence has meaning. And so it's a mentality, it's a culture. There's no doubt about it.
And they're, Amazon are a great example. And I know that people hate to hold them up because it's so obvious, but it is. Amazon, Apple, Uber, just three brands that I use with huge rate. I bought a new phone last week from Apple, walked into the store. The guy couldn't have been more helpful. He handed me off to someone who took me through the process. They knew everything about me. And within 45 minutes, I was done. Perfect. Thank you very much. Amazon, I have a problem with a product. You go through to them. Nothing is too much trouble. They just take the barriers out of the way. And I rarely do it. I rarely have an issue. But when I've had an issue with it, they've sorted it straight away. They are genuinely customer centric. And that's why those types of organizations are absolutely smashing it when it comes to customer relationship.
And we've all talked about that, right? That's differentiation, back to what you said earlier on, like the gambling client, right? That said when everything else is at parity, it's the experience that's the differentiation. Yeah. So I love it, and just in all your studies and everything. So if we take it back to, this business is about relationships. I'd love to know your thoughts on how AI has helped and how AI has hurt, or how do we need to think about AI in terms of how it impacts customer experience from the customer's point of view internally as employees delivering it? How do you think about AI?
How I think about AI through my professional lens is that of course, it will deliver a number of efficiencies and cost reductions for brands. And in a number of ways, it's going to improve service delivery and even things like personalization at scale. What we see in research, even as recent as the back end of last year, is there's a real risk of losing that human connectivity, right? And people aren't anti-AI, they aren't. But our research has shown that there's a clear trust issue that customers have with AI. Most customers think that it's going to be brands that will benefit the most from AI through, things like efficiencies that I've mentioned earlier. But if used in the right way and augmented with the human interface that we've seen, again, we've proven this research that we did at the back end of last year, that it can be positive. But it's how are people using it? And people make sweeping assumptions as well when it comes to AI and customers. And for example, one of the most interesting stats, I think, that came out of the work that we did the back end of last year, that when we looked at it by the age demographic, it was actually the under 35s that expressed the highest interest in speaking to a human. Now, you put most people around the boardroom table and they would assume that it was the other way around. So there are too many assumptions. I think that the challenge will be how, almost like the odds are even statement again, that the commoditization of AI and automation will limit differentiation. And that's the thing. And what we've found is that when the augmented experience is delivered in the right way, and it typically starts with a human, the levels of satisfaction coming out the back end are higher.
So like you're saying, a hybrid kind
of hybrid, yeah. And when it starts with a human, and again, there are so many different scenarios that we need to think about there, because you can't just have that as one sweeping statement. If it was the difference between something that's highly transactional and something that's highly personal, then it's clear, right? It could be, if it's something about a transaction on a bank, or if it's something to do with a personal issue, then people want the human connectivity. So you have to choose what are the scenarios, the journeys, the touch points where you might want to use AI. But I see it can be a win for the customer experience, but I think there are too many organizations running to it to be the solution to everything. And I just don't see it that way. And I think that we've seen some brands who are more cautious, blending adoption, making it easier for humans, creating that integration. And I think it's those that will be the winners, because they deploy AI where it can maximize impact and limit damage, rather than just trying to put it across absolutely everything.
If you could, for us, our poor human brains can only remember about 2 or 3 things at a time. We've said so many important things here. And it may be a point that we've made, or it might be a point that you haven't made yet. But if there was one takeaway that you wanted B2B C-suite executives that are going to be consuming this podcast to take away, this is the one thing I want you to take away for sure, what would that be?
I think the thing that I look at it from, where do we drive the most impact? How can we drive impact? And one thing that we've not talked about here is that in Ipsos, we did a very large piece of work about 5 years ago, where we created what we call the forces of CX. And this is the science behind strong relationships. And within Ipsos, we will only ever release a framework if it's been stress tested and peer reviewed to within an inch of its life, which this was. And what we found is that there are 6 forces of CX. There are 6 attributes that are linked to creating strong relationships. And typically 2 of them are hygiene factors, 2 of them are added value, and 2 of them are differentiators. And my recommendation to people who want to genuinely create stronger customer relationships and get closer to customers are to look through the lens of the forces, look at how your organization tracks against those, because we have proven that by using these things, these 6 forces as the yard rule, if you like, to how you provide experience, that will help you get closer to customers. Getting closer to customers then drives genuine tangible satisfaction, loyalty, and advocacy, which gets to ROI. And that would be the thing I would say people need to really, really think about.
Can I ask you if my takeaway from what you just said is a right one? That if we overall, what you said, that if we optimize for the customer experience, we're optimizing for growth and revenue expansion by default, right? Like we do a lot of focusing on revenue optimization, right? And cost reductions and efficiencies and savings. But if overall, if we just had the mindset of optimize for the customer experience, you will optimize for growth and revenue expansion in your business.
Correct. I mean, we've proven on repeat the importance of genuine advocates. And I think I said it at the top of the call here, that the focus on NPS as a metric went mad. But if people think about what the underlying principle behind that is to create genuine advocates, and genuine advocates will repeat spend, genuine advocates will forgive, and they will spend more. And the thing is, even in this day and age, when in some markets and in some parts of the world, it's very, very difficult commercially or financially, we still see customers that were willing to pay more for a better experience. And that only happens when you can genuinely deliver a better experience. So yeah, that would be, do it in the right way, focus on doing the right things. And whilst it takes a bit of faith and it takes a bit of time, the longevity that you see in terms of getting a return back into the organization is real. It's tangible. And you can see that coming back to your stat up front about the 400 leaders, because they are genuinely on experience and the rest follows.
I got to tell you, the mission behind this podcast is to just bring new ideas, new insights, new perspectives, new experiences from other C-suite executives all over the world, so that it can be the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you've given us so much new ways to think about CX here, and not just as a general term, but as one of the most important things that we should be thinking about in our businesses. And unfortunately, we go into board meetings and all kinds of stuff all the time, and nobody asks us about CX, right? You never go into a board meeting and somebody says, let's wait on those quota numbers. I want to focus on CX for a minute here, right? So we don't have the accountability we always have.
You're right.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see it more. We're starting to see it more on board agendas where it is, and I know a few brands where they start with the voice of the customer, and it has a feature, but it is still few and far between, and it needs to be more. That's for sure.
Thank you for coming on and just sharing all your insights and putting a spotlight on this for us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.